so I'm going to make a new document here. I'm going to go to print. 8.5 by 11 is fine. I don't need 300 DPI. Why?
Because you're not printing it?
That's right. We're just using screen, and that's why we're going to use RGB color. All right, so I want to make a new layer here. Where's my layers? So I'm going to take my layers, I'm going to pull it over here into my dock. I'm going to go here and make a new layer. Now, we know about this marquee tool that'll just make, simple shapes. So I'm just going to make a rectangular one. And I'm going to pull, just a rectangle, okay? Now we have a color here, our foreground, and it usually defaults, unless you tell it different, it defaults to your foreground color when you're just doing random things. Does that make sense? So we're going to go right here to our little gradient tool, and you can tell because it looks like a gradient. And immediately up here my control bar changes to these tools, just like it does with every tool. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 options here. One is, I'll go through them in a minute. Let's just talk about this one first, which is just your standard linear gradient, okay, which is the one you'll probably use the most. Now, if you look here, what I have it set up to is to go color, and then we have our checkerboard, which means what? Transparent. So it means color to nothing, okay? So I usually hold shift because shift always constrains things, okay? So I'm going to click and hold shift, and it's going to give me a simple gradient. Does that make sense? Now, let's look at these other ones real quick. So if I go to this one, let's see what it's called. It's not giving me my call out here. Oh well. So this one's radial. So it's going to go from the center out this way. Does that make sense? Okay. And by the way, if I turn this off, let's undo that. You can see it's just on its own layer. And let's get rid of that. By the way, you can go up here to your window if you want to go through your steps and go to history. And all your steps are right here. So you could just turn these off and it'll delete those steps. Does that make sense? If you want to see it that way, because sometimes you have to go in there and kind of find what you did. Now if I click here, I'll get this little flyout menu, and here's basics. So here's the one we have. This one is either, let's see if it's going foreground or background. So let's change the background color. So I'm going to flip this right here. And I'm going to put this magenta. Yeah, so this one's just going foreground to background. Okay, so now if I do the same thing, it'll just pull a foreground to background gradient. And I'm still on that round, so I don't really want that. Let's go to a linear. Foreground to background. Does that make sense? This one I think is a pyramid. Yeah, it's kind of a pyramid idea. This one is horizontal. You can see it right there. Let's do it a little smaller. Yeah, right there you can see it. And then this one, I don't even know what this one is. Oh, it's like a starburst. Okay. Now, if I took this and I put it here, then my starburst makes more sense. I could do something like that. And then since this is on its own layer, I can move it around. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's go back to here, back to our regular linear gradient. Go back to my gradient tool, and right here I can change this. So now we just did foreground to background, foreground to transparent. This one's just black and white, which will come in handy for some other things. And those are your basics. Then you can come in here and go, here's a bunch of presets. These are all presets. So now I can come in here and grab one of these presets and change it if I want. Does that make sense? And here's I'll go into that later. I don't want to get into that yet. And then, they have oranges, iridescent. Let's see what iridescent looks like. Yeah, sort of these iridescent colors. Okay, so you're going to have all these different ones you can play with, pastels, neutrals. It's weird they don't have metals in here. In Illustrator, they have metals and all that kind of stuff, so you can start with like coppers and things like that. If I click, okay, so look, if I click the tool here, let's cancel out of here. If I go up here and I click on the gradient, Here's your gradient right here. So if I move that, let's move it way over here and get it lighter, and then hit OK. Did it change it? I don't know if it did. It should have. Yeah, it added another one in. So on and so forth. So here's my gradient. Now I can also save that right here. New gradient preset right there. I don't tend to use presets, but you might want to. Let's try that, you guys, real quick. Okay? Okay, so Windows, all our tool palettes. Plugins, don't worry about that yet. View, it just has to do with all the things of viewing your document. Here's all your, your print size, flip horizontal. So just all the stuff, your guides, your these guides. So right up here, you guys see you have this ruler. I can pull this down and pull a guide. Okay. I can also pull this corner and zero out, so my zero's right there and my zero's right here, okay, if I need that. Now, if I want to get rid of that, I can go up here to View, Guides, Clear Guides, and they go away, okay? Also, I can right-click this, and I can switch this. See, it's pixels. I want it inches. I like this as a shortcut because if I go to other tools and they're in pixels, instead of going up here and changing it in Preferences, I just right-click the ruler bar and I just pick which one I want. And it changes all the measurements across all of my tools. Does that make sense? So it's just a quicker way of doing it. So let's go right here. So these are grouped. Edit will be your edit tools, which we'll go over one of those again today. Image, image rotation, image size, canvas size, all the things related to image. And under that is adjustments. So we're adjusting the image. Just remember that to find it, okay? And we're going to go adjustments, and we're going to be concerned with these three: brightness, contrast, levels, and hue saturation. Does that make sense? So let's go to levels first. So levels is basically your light and dark, but if you notice, it's split into dark, medium, and light. So our midtones, our darks, and our lights. So if I slide that slider, it's going to affect that area. Does that make sense? Yes? So if I slide this, if I go these midtones, there's not enough midtones in this thing. I can pull it in and darken those midtones up. I could go to the darks. See how it's really darkening it up? Or if the lights, I could pull the lights over and it's going to go lighter because I don't have anywhere to go other than that. Or I could pull this way over. So if I pull it way over, it's going to do that. If I go this way, it's going to blow it out, so on and so forth. Does that make sense? It's pretty straightforward. It's your mids, your lights, and your darks. And that's how it affects it. Now, another one's real simple in that same menu, brightness, contrast. So brightness is just exactly what it says. It's how bright this image is. So that's just overall brightening the entire image, not just the mids or not just the highs. Does that make sense? So it doesn't, I rarely ever use it. But what I might use in here is contrast, which is just going to push the darks darker and the lights lighter and push them away from each other. See how it gets more washed out when I go this way? And go this way, it gets, overly. So that's simple. And then the last one we need to know that we're going to use a lot is adjustments, hue saturation. This is really handy to me. So here's the spectrum right here, which is hue. So I could go through this, I can roll through the spectrum and it's just going to change it based on, what the color spectrum is. This one is saturation, which is real simple. So it goes oversaturated, completely desaturated. So it's black and white. Does that make sense? And you can see it needs some adjustment in the levels when you go to black and white. See how it's not, it needs a little more contrast and a little more punch. Does that make sense? In the darks, I think. And then lightness is just what we said before. It just lightens or darkens the entire image. Does that make sense? So let's just grab any image, and I want you guys to play with those three. By the way, it also right here has auto tone, which is kind of a color thing. So I can try that. Looks like it pushed it bluer. Sometimes this will work pretty good on just like a image I take. Auto contrast, didn't hardly do anything. And then auto color. Again, it pushed it bluer, so it thinks it needs more blue in this. Sometimes I'll land on, it didn't need that much blue. Sometimes it'll land on something that's really nice. I hardly ever use it. I'll try it, but I hardly ever use it. Now here's another thing. When I'm doing any kind of image making, like let's say, so we just did our gradient. So I'm going to take this magenta, I'm going to go to my gradient, I'm going to put a new layer here because we have to have a layer above the layer to use our layer blends, and I'm going to pull it just about to the horizon line. Oops, wrong type of, I want foreground to nothing. Oh, and I got to get on this one. So now I have that. So what I do a lot, let's find an overlay that maybe makes some kind of sense here. Let's say I'm doing that. Let's say that I like that, which I don't, but let's say I do. I can go to my hue saturation, and I can roll through this color spectrum and go, is there a better choice? Which I do a lot, okay? Whenever I throw a color down and digitally, like that looks way better right there. Whenever I throw a color down digitally, I try and see if there's a better solution because it's just so easy to do this. Now I could come here and go, do I like that saturation? Do I want to desaturate a little bit where it's not quite so noticeable? So now it's this, right? And I could even come up here with my opacity and pull down the opacity and maybe just kiss it with a little color. Does that make sense? So let's try those three. Okay, so let's look at something here, you guys. So if we were using our let me get rid of this. Let's go back to this. Let's say that I want to go on here and I want to saturate this more or whatever. Levels it, saturate it, whatever. If I do this, you know, and I save this file, open it up tomorrow, I'm stuck with this. Does that make sense? Okay, so I don't want to do that because we always want to work non-destructively. So down here in your layers palette, you have your trash, which we've already gone over. We have the plus, which adds a layer. And now we're going to go skip that one, and we're going to go right here to this little black and white sphere. Click it, and these are your, it's called an adjustment layer. Okay, so here's what it's going to do. I'm going to adjust the levels, so I go right here to levels. And let's just go darken it a little bit and maybe pull the lights up. Let's do that. And then I'm going to close this. So now this lives right here, and I can double click it, and I can come back in here and I can readjust it. And let's say tomorrow I come in, I hate this. I can just take this and drag it away into the trash can just like a layer. So it's non-destructive. Does that make sense? Here's something that I've done a million times, but this is really healthy or helpful with, is hue saturation. Sometimes I'll come in here and I'll juice a picture a little bit. Let's say there, which is too much. And then I go, okay, and you know, maybe I change this and do whatever, make it a little darker. And then I come in tomorrow and I go, this is way oversaturated, it's too dark, blah, blah, blah. I can either go and readjust it, or I can just take this. By the way, I can just click it and hit trash. Also, I can drag it into the trash, or I can just click the trash. And I can get rid of these things. Does that make sense? So non-destructive, okay? It has most of your sort of basic, some of the, what we're worried about today is just brightness, contrast, levels, hue, saturation. And we'll get into, you know, this other stuff later. We don't need to get into that yet. Okay, we're just trying to get basic adjustment tools here. Damn it. Okay. All right, so let's try that one, you guys. Let's play around with the hue, saturation, levels, and brightness, contrast with your adjustment layers, okay? We've also talked about the non-destructive thing in the context of the, remember, the layer, current layer and below with our stamp tool, so we could put a layer above and say, that's the same thing, kind of. It's just a different verbalizing of it. Does that make sense? So that current layer and below and the current, or sample all layers, that's just putting everything on another layer that is also non-destructively. So that's two different ways we're working non-destructively. Does that make sense? That we went over Monday and today. That makes sense, correct? So this is on its own layer. If I try to do this tool on a background, remember the background's locked. I can't really do much on it. Okay? So let's turn this off. This one's on its own layer, and we're going to go up here back to image, or no, I'm sorry, edit, because we're going to edit the image. We're going to go down here to transform, because that's what we're going to do. Okay? And I'm going to start with, because I use this a lot, I'm going to go to transform, distort. It gives me this box, and I can basically just grab these things and tweak it however I want to tweak it. Does that make sense? Okay. I could pull this. And now in that set of tools right here, transform, there's also, let's go skew, which just does this or this. Okay, it just skews the image. Edit, transform. Okay, this one's interesting, and we'll get more into this later, so don't worry too much about this. This is warp, and we'll do a project with this, so I just want to show it to you. So it gives me this grid, right? And I can grab pretty much anywhere, and I can warp the image. Okay, now I can also come up here and go, right now it's on default, up here in my control bar, and I'm going to go 5 by 5, and now I can get more points to warp. And also I'm getting those Bezier curves just like we got on our pin tool, remember? So I could technically spin all this. I could do a lot of stuff with this, okay? I'll show you an exercise with this that's really handy. Does that make sense? So if I wanted to get Psychedelic City, there it is. Now, under that suite of tools again, there is transform. Let's go this way. I'm going to shrink this down a little bit. So if I go Control T, by the way, you guys, which I always forget where it is. That's just general transform. So just remember that, okay? I'll find out where it is. I forgot. And if I take this and I just grab a corner, I can just resize stuff. But I'm going to go up here to Edit, to my transform. And I'm going to go Perspective. And if I grab this, it'll just pull it in perspective. Kind of like a 1-point perspective. Does that make sense? And I could pinch it up here. Now, what do I use this for? I might make a quick flat, draw some cobblestones, and then I'll take it, I'll lay it over my image, and I'll pull the perspective so it looks like it's laying over the path in my image. Does that make sense? Or I might use it for a wood floor. I'll create those slats, and then I'll just pull that perspective thing so it looks like it's on the floor. Because it's just easier and it's uniform. What else is in here? Rotate, that's obvious. And then here, I can go, like let's say I have an element here. This is important. Let's say I have this building, and I go, I'm going to reuse this building for whatever, but I want it to be going the other way. I would go Edit, Transform, and I could go Flip Vertical. I use this a lot. Or I could go Flip Horizontal. Transform, Flip Horizontal. Okay? The reason I'm saying that is here under Image, if you notice there is Image Rotation, and I could do the same thing, but notice it flips the whole image. So if you just want to flip an element, you go to Edit. If you want to flip the whole image, you can do it from here. Does that make sense? And then these are just, rotate clockwise, that kind of thing. And by the way, under Image, it also has a rotate clockwise, but it does the whole image. So just remember under Layer, it's just going to affect the whole image. Does that make sense? Okay, so just grab something and go in and play around with your transform tools a little bit. I just want you to know where they are. This one, where is it? Let's open that one. Now, I do this a lot where I could go Control Alt C, and I could come in here and go V, right? Or I could go here, pull this out of the tab, and I could just drag it in. Okay? Doesn't really matter. So I'm going to put this behind her right here. And I'm going to make sure this is behind the girl portrait. Now what I could do if I really wanted to line it up is I could knock down my opacity like that, and I could really, let's do that. Let's line it up like that. Actually, it needs to be bigger, I think. So let's do it like that. And then I'm going to go put this, I'm going to unlock this layer, otherwise I can't do anything with it, and I want to pull this underneath it. So now it's underneath it. Now, we talked about, here's our trash can in the layers palette. Here's our add a layer in the layers palette, or duplicate. I could pull this down on that and duplicate. Folder, which we don't care about. We can just make a folder. By the way, all that is making a folder, and you can group layers into a folder. That's all that is. If you like working that way, there it is. So again, I'm going to get rid of that. So and then we have our adjustment layers, and now we have what this is called a layer mask. Okay, so I'm gonna zero this out over here. My foreground background swatch, it just works better if you do that, and go black to white, which is this little thing right there. We'll default it back. I'm going to go back on this layer, and then I'm going to click this little thing that says layer mask, or that little, thing with a hole in it. And it creates this right here. That's your layer mask, okay? And I'm going to grab a brush. I'm going to make it bigger. And I'm going to make it a real soft brush. And I'm going to pull the opacity down up here. By the way, you guys, if you notice, you have an opacity up here in your control bar. The control bar is the stuff in your tools. Does that make sense? So that applies to nothing but this brush that I'm using, right? So if I lower the opacity on this, which I'm going to do, all it does is lower the opacity on my brush. Okay? If you lower the opacity over here in your layers, it lowers the opacity in the whole layer. Okay? So if I lower it here, it's going to do that, which is not what I want right now. Okay? I'm going to make this brush bigger. Actually, probably too big. We're at a low opacity. I might even go, let's just try that. And if you notice, I can click here, and if you notice, I get this little frame around the thumbnail. That means I'm on the thumbnail. I want to be on the layer mask. And black, I always forget how this goes. Black reveals, white conceals. Okay? I think that's how it goes. Hang on a second, that's weird. Oh, hang on. Remember I lowered the opacity on this? I have to put it back up. So I got to go back and go back here. Now, I'm going to go the opacity even lower. So you can see what it's doing. It's basically painting out the foreground image. You've probably seen this in a million movie posters, by the way. Am I wrong? I just saw one. We always had this face, and everything's contained in the face or whatever. Okay, so look, here's the beauty of this. I can go through here, and I can go, okay. I mean, number one, I can make it look like it's just sort of painted onto her face. I can do a bunch of different things with it. And I can come down here. Now, see how I've oversprayed there, right there, you guys? Here's the beauty of this. Now I go up here, and I go, okay, I screwed that up. I just flipped this to go to white, because white conceals. And now I can go and paint that back in. So you don't think of it as you're erasing, you're painting in or you're painting out. Does that make sense? The way I look at it is you're basically making a stencil. If you look over here, see my mask right there? You can see where I punched a hole in the layer. That's, my marks, right? So what you're doing is it's like a stencil that you can paint the part you cut out back in. That's basically what it is. Now I'm going to flip this back to black. This is going to come in handy for a whole bunch of stuff, and it's a really non-destructive tool. Now, as I get closer out here, I'd probably have to get smaller with my, by the way, to make your brush smaller or larger without going up to the brush thing, it's just your brackets, your right or left. Right is smaller or bigger, and left is smaller. So let's flip this back to white again. Now, I could also up my opacity here because I actually want this gone. This here. So the beauty of this is that you can really get pretty precise with this because you can paint in and out. And you don't have to be all that precious about it, which is always nice. And then if I go, I don't like this part over here. I don't want to come all the way down here. I'm going to lower my opacity again. Make sure I'm on white, I think. Yeah. let's put the opacity way down. Because let's say I want to make it look like it was painted. Then I might have it fade out and see a little bit of her flesh tone down here, so it feels more like it was sort of, you know, where the paint stopped. So I'm painting it a little bit back in. Does that make sense? Okay, let's try it. Do you guys want my files, or do you just want to find your own? You just want me to give you mine? Okay, hang on. Because this, I think, is a high-res file, if I remember right. I'm going to make a selection here. Okay, so right here, with your spot healing brush, your healing brush, down below that is your patch tool. So I'm going to go, it's on source, which is fine. Normal, all that's fine, okay? You don't need to change any of these, just keep it on that first one. I'm going to make a selection here. And then, see how it's got a little arrow? You guys see that? I'm going to pull this over, and it's just going to disappear. Does that make sense? Well, it doesn't make any sense, but that's what it does. It doesn't make any sense to me. It's dark magic, but... Now, see how it'll pick that up there? So you got to have a place to kind of pull it, but what is it using? Content aware. It's using content aware again, which has gotten really good. Now watch, like if I want to get rid of this thing back here, again, why do we need a variety of these tools? You'll see probably right now. Hang on. So here's my patch tool. I'm going to just go like that. Let's see if I can do this. But see how I got to line up that shoreline back there? I'm going to line it up. Boom. We've got a little bit of ghosting right there, but I can now. I might come in here with my. I might come back in here with my clone stamp because look, we got to repeat. See that little red, that little whatever that is, that buoy or whatever it is. I'm going to grab, I'm going to lower, it's already lowered. I'm going to grab some of this water out here. I'm going to sample it. And I'm going to erase that. I'm going to take some of this over here and I'm going to paint it. Oops. I'm going to, God darn it. I'm going to grab some of that. And I'm going to paint it over here. Because I don't like that little schmutz that it got there. And I'm going to paint this out. And actually, I'm going to grab a little of this because towards the shoreline, the water gets a little lighter. And it's not too bad. You see that? Yeah. So like all this crap, if I was using this picture, there's different ways I could do it. I could go, let's see if we can do it with our spot healing. Let's see if the spot healing brush will do it. Yeah. It's another way of doing it. Okay? So if I wanted to go on here and go, well, I don't want all this ugly shit on here, all this trash cans and all this crap. And there's different ways that I might do this. So if I went to my patch tool and I didn't have anywhere to pull from, I might go back to this tool. I also might go to my, because sometimes when you get too big with a spot healing brush, it gets funky. So let's go to our healing brush. So now this one, if you guys remember, I gotta do just like we do with our, and by the way, look how hard edge that is. I don't want a hard edge brush, so I'm gonna make this a real soft edge brush. I'm gonna do current below, so I would be on another layer. And if you guys remember, when I used the regular healing brush, I still gotta select a place to sample from, and then come over here, but it's also using, see I just picked up some of that there. So that screwed it up. Let's try it again. So I'd probably have to get a smaller brush here. Select right by it, and it's just going to use content aware. So it's using a combination of things. It's going, okay, you want to sample from there, but I'll make it smooth it out so it looks nice. Let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of this. And now I'd Photoshop my head onto somebody with a fantastic beach body, and I'd stick myself on that picture. And then that would become my profile on Tinder, or whatever the hell people use now. Does that make sense? Let's try it. Do you want my photo?